Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into a really complex story from one of our sources. It's about a massive, fictional protest that completely engulfs Iran in early 2026. This is a story of national pride, sudden economic collapse, and two totally different explanations for why it's all happening.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's December 28th, 2025. Iran pulls off a major technological feat, successfully launching 3 brand new satellites into orbit. It's a huge win, a real moment of national pride, and the leadership is celebrating the signal of the country's strength.
But, that feeling doesn't last long. At all. Almost overnight, the whole mood on the ground changes. A small protest over sky-high inflation at a shopping center in Tehran suddenly ignites, and within just a few days, it spreads like wildfire across the entire country.
So how does that happen? How does a country go from this peak of scientific achievement to the absolute brink of social collapse, seemingly overnight? Well, the source we're examining offers 2 profoundly different answers to that question, 2 competing stories for how one protest turned into a national crisis.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the protests themselves. Then we'll dive into those 2 conflicting narratives. After that, we'll trace the deep historical roots of this rivalry, and finally, we'll get to what this source claims is really at stake here. All right, first up, let's just talk about the sheer scale of these events. Because according to the source, this wasn't some small, isolated incident. No way. This was a national eruption that moved with incredible speed from just one market to over 100 cities.
The source really paints a picture of a nation on fire. You've got protests popping up everywhere in major cities across the country with some pretty powerful acts of defiance, like the burning of the national flag. And then the official response comes down hard. The internet gets shut down, and a massive crackdown begins, leading to thousands of arrests and, tragically, a number of casualties.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. How does our source explain the cause of all this chaos? It's not a simple story. Instead, we get 2 competing narratives, one that's right there on the surface for everyone to see, and another that, according to the source, is hidden just underneath.
So the first story, the one everyone can see, is all about the economy. The source says the currency just completely collapsed. The exchange rate reportedly ballooned to 700,000 rial for a single US dollar. I mean, can you imagine? That kind of hyperinflation makes daily life practically impossible. It's the obvious trigger for all this public anger.
But the source we're looking at says, hold on, that's not the whole story. It argues that this wasn't just about the economy. It claims that spark of protest was deliberately fanned into a raging fire by a disinformation campaign. The allegation is that Western media spread fake news, even a rumor that the supreme leader was about to flee to Russia, all to create panic.
So you see the 2 stories taking shape, right? It's this huge contrast. On one hand, you have the internal story, a genuine, grassroots movement of citizens who were just fed up with the economy. But on the other hand, you have this external story, that this is all an engineered plot, manufactured by the US and Israel to bring the nation down from the inside.
Now, to back up that second story, the external plot, the source says you have to rewind the clock, way back. You can't understand what's happening in 2026, it argues, unless you go deep into the history of Iran's relationship with the West, all the way back to 1941.
Yeah, the argument here is that what's happening in 2026 isn't some new random event. Nope, it's just the latest chapter in a long, pretty bitter rivalry, a history defined by foreign intervention on one side and revolutionary resistance on the other.
So the source lays out this timeline to make its case. It starts in 1941 with Britain putting a Western-friendly Shah in power. Then it jumps to the 50s when the US helped start Iran's nuclear program. But the real game changer, the moment everything flips, is 1979, the Islamic Revolution, the overthrow of the Shah, and the US hostage crisis. That's the moment Iran goes from being a Western ally to its fiercest opponent. And that one event, 1979, is the absolute key to understanding this perspective. It didn't just change the government, it totally reshaped the nation's identity and the entire region. The source emphasizes that modern Iran was basically forged in opposition to the West, which set the stage for decades of hostility, sanctions, and conflict.
And this all builds to the source's final, and frankly, most dramatic claim. If this really is an external plot, like it argues, then what's the ultimate goal? Well, according to this narrative, it's not just about politics or economics, it's about the very soul of the nation.
So what's the endgame according to this narrative? It's simple. Regime change. Total regime change. The goal, it claims, is to tear down the Islamic Republic, and get this, to install the son of the exact same Shah that was overthrown back in '79. So in this view, all the demands for freedom are just a smokescreen for bringing back a Western-aligned monarchy.
And to really drive this point home, the narrative shifts from politics to culture. It argues that what's truly under threat here isn't just the government. It's a deep cultural and religious heritage, symbolized by these incredible places, the sacred shrines in Mashhad and Qom, ancient cities like Isfahan, the breathtaking beauty of Shiraz, and the historic bazaar in Tabriz. This is the identity of Iran that it claims is at risk.
So this leads to the core warning in the source material. It's a message aimed right at the Iranian people. It claims that the protesters, however well-intentioned, are being used as pawns in a much bigger game. They're being promised freedom, but what they'll actually get, the source warns, is a new kind of servitude, a future of slavery, vulgarity, and a liberal government that will erase who they are.
And all of this leaves us with a really powerful final question, one that gets to the very heart of the narrative we've just explored. The big takeaway here isn't an answer, but a much deeper feel for one very powerful side of this story. A story where the same exact cry for freedom can mean two completely different things.